Hello and welcome to the KE Report. I'm your host, Shad Markwitz, and today we're getting an update from Peter Krauth, author of the book The Great Silver Bull and editor of Silver Stock Investor, the newsletter that really focuses on investing in silver, everything from the physical to the electronic, then down into the silver stocks, of course. And we'll get into all of that and more today. Peter, it's been a little while since we've had you on the show. We were just looking, it was the end of January. Think how much the world has changed in just the last few months.
Oh,
Boy, we've had so many crazy things happen in the markets, in geopolitics, as far as everything from Fed policy to tariffs to export bans on minerals to critical minerals, executive orders. I mean, we've had a lot going on. What are some of the key things on your radar now in this stew of different macro forces?
well, that's quite the intro. Thanks, Shannon. Yes, you're right. It's just unreal. Who would have guessed just how much and how dramatically things would have changed, like you say, since the end of January? So we're talking about, what is that, 2.5 months now? Unreal. And it doesn't look like anything's going to slow down or the volatility is going to lessen much at all. It's just been absolutely crazy. And, there are a few things to mention. I think, the elephant in the room is the tariffs. You've got, it's caused so much, Trump and then the tariffs, together have caused so much volatility and changes, and it's triggered a lot of things. And I mean, I hardly, I hardly know where to start. Frankly, the fact that we've had this huge wave of tariffs that are one day on, one day off. They're mostly on. Many of them are on hold, but they certainly have a lot of participants rethinking things, realigning with others, rethinking things like supply chain setups, all this stuff. If you look at also what has happened with the dollar, it has absolutely dramatically sold off. This is very abnormal in terms of the kind of drop it's had and in the time frame that it's been dealt that blow. And if you look at how different assets have reacted, so stocks sold off dramatically, have recouped a portion of their big drop. Gold absolutely soared, has remained very, very strong. Silver actually peaked prior to gold, in the sense that it was up, I think, at least in the futures price. It peaked around $35. If I have this right, it would have been, oh my goodness, probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago, towards the end of March, and then actually sold off a bit early. Now, have a few thoughts about that. I think that in some ways, silver may have been sort of, obviously they've taken slightly different paths. It may have sniffed out the concern about the tariffs and thinking that these were real, the impact was real, the risk of recession took on another level. And I think that's why we've seen silver not hold up the way gold has. I mean, it's been pretty decent, frankly, if you look at asset classes in general. Certainly has held up better than the broader markets and bonds, by the way, which is another sort of whole ball of wax. But silver has held up relatively well. I just get the sense that it may have sniffed out this heightened risk now of recession, given what's gone on with tariffs. And I think that, in the sense that it's backed off somewhat from its recent high, I think that's the market saying, well, if there's recession and silver, is a good chunk, up to 60% of silver demand now is industrial related, that demand may slow, may soften, and therefore that is, I think, affecting the silver price to some extent, weighing on it. I think that that's going to have a limited life. I think what I'm saying is really over the next probably quarter or maybe two, we'll see things play out where we'll realize that the demand for silver is holding up very, very well to a considerable degree from investment, frankly, as well as from industrial demand, which I think the concerns about are overblown. We can get into that a little bit. And so I think, these are the kinds of things to watch. I also think that the dollar, to be honest, I thought it was going to bounce earlier. I did not see it going further down the way it has. That surprised me. It is quite oversold now. Some kind of a bounce. Even, the dollar index is around 99 and a half. If it went to 103, 104, I wouldn't be surprised. I could see that in conjunction with a pullback in the precious metals. I'm not saying that will happen, but I think a relatively high probability type of scenario, and that would make a fantastic opportunity to for anyone who's not doesn't feel that they have enough exposure to precious metals and the related stocks to take position or to add to those positions.
Well, and Peter, just in hearing you lay that out, another thing that comes to mind with silver's industrial component, I think closer to 60% now, and the precious metals more like 40%. There's that tug and pull between the worries of recession, the worries of the tariffs, but also the precious metals nature, looking at its big brother gold and saying, wow, look how far it's moved. But we've got a gold silver ratio now that's a little out of whack. I mean, it's over 100 and it just doesn't usually stay there historically. So, do you anticipate a catch-up trade in silver on the precious metals component side to catch up to the move that gold has made and compress that gold silver ratio some?
I do. The tough part, like always, is not if but when, and I do expect that to happen. It's always happened. I don't see that this time is different necessarily. I think especially now with gold solidly above 3,000, I do think that there is, some kind of a correction would be more than reasonable in gold. Something along the lines of up to 10% would also not shock me. So if it got to, slightly below 3,000, I would not be shocked. But I do think that, over the sort of near to medium term, it's reasonable to see silver catch up. And as we sort of chatted before we started the call, gold hanging on around 3,000 and silver catching up in that ratio. I could see silver really absolutely soar. And I think take out that $35 sort of overhead resistance, which I think it needs to do. The 35 to 37 is the next step it needs to take out. And then, I think technically, if we look at how silver has behaved from there, the upside is pretty big, which would be somewhere around 50. But reaching 35, 37 and holding that, I think would do a lot for silver and pull a lot of people in. I think a lot of people are really now, I'm seeing headlines I never saw where you've got, Yahoo Finance, you've got CNBC. Some of them are starting to talk about gold. And frankly, it's about time. And I think the attention going to gold will start to bleed into silver because gold at 3,300 is looking pretty rich for a lot of people, and they're going to look for that alternative. Silver is that natural alternative, and I do think that that's going to help the ratio come down. Gold doesn't have to rise, as you said. Gold can hang around 3,000, and the ratio, dropping to somewhere around 80, frankly, which is still elevated historically, would do wonders for silver and the silver miners. And I think that that's what we have in store. People have a tremendous opportunity right now, I think, frankly, to get positioned for it because, and even it surprises me even sometimes, but when I see news with some silver companies or with silver itself, you see gold move, and then surprisingly, it takes often a day or up to 2 days to see, a similar move come in silver, and sometimes news in silver companies. Not perhaps the larger producers, but sometimes in the juniors. This is something I've observed is that it takes often a day or a couple of days for the news to sink in, for the market to kind of digest it, and then the stock starts to move. And so whether that's good, positive or negative news, it's interesting because it really does speak to the opportunity. But frankly, like I say, it surprises me. You can follow that, digest the news, obviously decide for yourself if you feel that it's positive, and if it is positive, you will often have a little bit of time to move on that before the market seems to recognize what you have.
Yeah, Peter, I think we actually got into that a little bit last time with what happened with Suma Silver, where they put out those two resources back to back and nothing happened the first day or two, and then 2 or 3 days later, bam, there it is, the reaction.
There
So
you go.
there is these times where you can percolate on the news for a little while before it
Yeah.
circulates, and then you have this big move higher. And the same thing with silver. Silver is notoriously a catch-up trade. It's notoriously a laggard, and then when it finally gets the memo, it's like, oh, hey, and then it shoots past everybody's expectations. So kind of an interesting market to trade, but it gives you time as an investor to get positioned when you something key happens on the macro or on the company in the micro. I want to ask you a question though about what I'm noticing in SILJ, which is an ETF for those listening of
Mhm.
they're not necessarily the junior silver stocks, even though it's a junior ETF. There's still a lot of intermediates in there and small producers. There are some juniors in there as well. But when you
Right.
look at what happened in the silver squeeze, if you remember that, of course,
Yes.
back in early 2021 in February, SILJ had a really nice move where it bounced up to 1751. And that was when silver, I think, just broke 30. But what I've
Right.
been noticing is like a bouncing ball that bounces lower and lower.
Right.
Last year in October, we had that nice run from September, October. Silver got up to a higher level. 3507 was the peak intraday, 3504 was the highest close, but the SILJ got up to 14 and some change, 1417. So a
Right.
lot lower than the 17 when the silver squeeze happened at a higher silver price. Then in
Right.
March, just last month, silver got up to a higher level. A lot of people don't even realize that silver got up to 35.49 as an intraday on the futures market. And so even a higher level than last October, and yet the SILJ only got up to 1298. So what we're seeing is a higher price in silver those last three bounces, but a lower price in SILJ. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. And wow, I mean, part of it I think is that SILJ is as you pointed out, it's not all silver companies. You certainly have other things like you have some gold companies, you have some gold royalties, you have so-called silver companies that really are primarily other metals. You have just a big mix, and part of it I think is that it doesn't sufficiently represent the silver space. So it's a little bit misleading to watch what SILJ does, frankly, when you compare it to silver itself. Nonetheless, it is true that it should still offer more leverage. And I think that the market is basically, looking at the silver space and not giving it the credit that it should. And it's kind of like silver versus gold. Unfortunately, we're seeing a SILJ versus silver that kind of acts the same way. And I think that we will absolutely, when people look for something that has some, that represents the space, that offers leverage, that has some liquidity, et cetera. I think that, I mean, it has a billion dollars in assets. And so I think that, it's certainly widely enough owned. But I think that when we do see a lot more attention paid to the silver space, I think we're going to see some sort of dramatic catch up in the SIL as well as the SILJ.
Well, yeah, and I'm looking at even some individual silver stocks that I guess you could say are silver stocks, something like First Majestic. I mean, look at the
Yep.
move it had in the silver squeeze up to almost $20. It was like 18, $19. And then in 2024, last year, we saw a move up to nearly $8, like 7.94. And then this year, we saw it get to 7.27. So again, a series of lower highs. And we could probably go through a
Yeah,
lot of other silver stocks, see
for
that same
sure.
pattern. I guess my question is, do you think that there's less and less momentum? Because it's to the point you made about GDXJ, the same thing's
Mhm.
happening in the gold stocks. We're seeing
Right.
less and less of a pop. Like we always get the pop, but just less and less
Right.
of one each time these metals move higher. What do you think it needs to be? More momentum, a steady blast higher, or something like that? Because in gold, we have had momentum, we have had higher prices, and it still hasn't. The GDXJ literally this week just got above its 2020 peak, and it's a $1,200 higher gold price, the fattest margins ever. Is there something changing under the surface with precious metals investors, Peter?
Well, I mean, part of it, I think, is the fact that, well, I kind of see two things. So I think one of them is that costs are higher as well. So to some extent, margins have been compressed. The dollar amount of profits are decent, but I think that the percentage profits are being squeezed. The other thing I think that we need is, there's a lot of apathy, and I think that we need to see the rotation has started. That, in my view, has happened. Gold, for example, versus the S&P, gold versus the 60/40 portfolio been a clear breakout there. But I think that that's still sort of the smart money and the big money that has really started to participate in that. I think that those two are, for me at least, probably the bigger reasons why we've seen this underperformance. And I think that, this will trickle down. We've seen the larger participants start to move into the gold space. And I think that, as I say, over the next probably few quarters, year and a half, we're going to see the typical sort of average retail investor come to terms with the fact that the market, the broader markets, really will continue to struggle. At best, I'm going to say kind of struggle and move gradually downwards. At worst, perhaps go through some significant sell-offs, corrections, and even true bear markets, that are defined at about 20%, potentially even more than that. And I think that's what it will take to see bigger sort of swaths of the retail investment sector rotate into this, and that will really start to get things moving in a much, much bigger way.
Yeah, it's been nice to see just so far this year in 2025, to the point you made earlier in the discussion here, that there has been that divergence between how gold and the gold stocks, silver and the silver stocks have performed versus the broader US equities and even some other equities in other countries. So it's nice to see maybe a rotation out of traditional equities and a little bit of that trickling into the precious metal sector. But if you see that widen, that gap widen, where there's stark outperformance in the precious metals complex compared to everything else, it'll be hard to ignore for fund managers or people that track that on their screen. So let's give people some ideas then, Peter, as far as when the worm does really turn and when we start seeing more of those generals come in, the kind of companies that they may want to get positioned in. I'll just throw you a hypothetical question here.
Sure.
Let's just say we finally get above 35 and stick, and we get up into the
Mm.
high 30s, the low 40s. What kind of companies do you want to be positioned in? Do you want to be in producers that can monetize it right away? Do you like development projects that get re-rated because their economics look more attractive at those prices? Or do you still like some of the explorers because if they make a discovery, the discovery is now worth more?
So yes, yes, and yes. I mean, honestly, to varying degrees, I think that these different sort of subsectors will show different amounts of leverage. And then, each of the companies has their own quirks and characteristics. But, I think it's so early still that I think that these quote unquote larger silver producers have a lot of room to run. There's plenty of time, I think, still to get into those. I can think of names like Kerr, Hecla, First Majestic, Aya, Gold and Silver, Endeavor. These are companies that produce already considerable amounts of silver, offer fantastic leverage to the silver price, and have barely moved already. So, tremendous opportunity, I think, in all of those names. If I think about some of the ones that are developers, one that I've got in mind that I think has really been doing some tremendous work and really people I think should look at more closely is Cerro de Pasco. Now, first thing I want to point out is that Eric Sprott owns something like 15% of this company. This is a Peruvian development project. They are still relatively early, but they have what's considered the world's largest above ground metals resource. So, probably I'm going to say we're looking at typically somewhere around, I don't know, 50 to 100 or more dollars per ton to process metals, get ore out of the ground to process it. Because their resource is above ground, we're looking at as little as $1 to $2 per ton to process this. And so they are going through very, very diligently. They've completed their first drill program. They drilled 40 holes. Because this is a tailings, basically, a pile. It's extremely consistent in terms of what they're getting. This will be very, very predictable in terms of how when they process it and so on. So they did 40 holes. It's extremely consistent. They're getting very, very good grades. It's about 40% of the value, maybe a little bit less, but about 40, roughly 40% of the value of this ore pile is silver. And you've got upwards of about, I'm going to say, if you look at it in silver equivalency, you're looking at about, let's say, 150 or so grams per ton silver equivalent. Again, above ground, which is just fantastic in terms of having to process a an ore stockpile. What's interesting is you have about, I'm going to say, roughly maybe 50 grams per ton silver. You have some gold, some zinc, some lead. And what the company did not expect is a rare metal called gallium. And they have gallium to the degree that equals pretty much the same content as the silver, which is quite impressive. So, I mean, all of their modeling so far has not included the gallium, and they feel that the gallium, which by the way is something which is about 98% of gallium produced globally, is from China. China has now restricted or basically cut off its gallium exports to the US, which is one of the biggest consumers of it. It's important for technology, it's important for military applications. And they have a very significant Western resource of gallium. So that in alone is quite impressive. And they think that the gallium alone could probably add anywhere from 15 to 20% to the value of the project. There's also a lot of pyrite. It makes up about 50% of the tailings. That could also be a valuable byproduct. So they're advancing this quite quickly. If anyone goes to their site and starts looking at any of the charts and the figures that they have, you'll see that the 40 holes that they've done was within this large rectangular area. They're basically applying for permits to drill outside of that area. They're going to show the government of Peru what they've accomplished, that what they said was there is in fact there. Then they will start drilling outside of that area. We know that the copper will improve as they head south. We know that the grades have improved as they've headed south inside of that area. And then there's an additional area that is actually, frankly, an environmental issue for the nearby town called Cerro de Pasco, same name as the company, where they've got some toxic tailings. And that is something that they're applying to drill as well. And once this thing goes into production, they're actually going to be doing everyone a huge favor because their processing will actually clean up that entire toxic tailings and help clean up the environment and contribute in a massive way, both for the federal and local governments in terms of the taxes that they will pay in this project. It's really something like, I think, 28% of their profits will go to the local governments. We're talking about, I think, somewhere upwards of hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of contribution that they're going to make. So this is definitely one that you want to have on your radar. I think that the market does not quite appreciate what they have. So definitely want to have a close look at.
Yeah, I love the cleanup of the sins of the past from prior mining decades where maybe things weren't done with the same standards we have today, but a company can come in like Cerro de Pasco and clean it up. I was actually just talking with Brad from GoGold Resources just yesterday, and they are doing the exact same thing at their Peral project where they're cleaning up an old tailings thing and processing and making money and producing, but also doing a good social license aspect with the community. Helps the mining company get in a better light with people. It also helps with future permitting, and it's just nice to see when companies can do this. Just a follow up on Cerro de Pasco, though, when I have their slide deck up, if I
Mhm.
look at, they have two different tailings areas, but this
Right.
Quillacocha area is, the big one, the main one, and it's about 27% silver, 30% zinc, 12% gold, 12% lead, 19% copper, not including the gallium that you outlined, though, and they also have indium, which is another
Absolutely.
key critical mineral. So they have such a mix. Do you think it's that investors have a hard time wrapping their head around truly polymetallic deposits as far as, hey, is this it's reporting in silver equivalent, but it's not really a silver dominant deposit. So the same critique we used with SILJ, we could easily apply to any polymetallic company, not just Cerro de Pasco. If you don't have 50%, 60%, 70% silver, it's hard to see
Right.
it tracking the silver price. So how do you play something like a polymetallic company where there's lots of metals, lots of drivers, more diversification, but it's not really following any particular metal dominantly?
No, that's a good point. And that's true. I agree with you on that. It doesn't follow a particular metal that dominates it. What I will say is that the silver is, like you said, somewhere around probably 30-ish%. A lot of the silver producers actually are around there or perhaps a little bit higher. I think that we're going to have to see what happens with the gallium and the indium, and they could certainly sway things somewhat. But what I find interesting is that what I think what people are perhaps underestimating is when you get the silver price to move significantly, which I certainly am a big bull on and a believer in, and especially in relation to some of the other metals that are in there. I think that will change the weighting overall over time in terms of silver content and silver value for the project. And that's why I feel that the silver will continue to be sort of the most important aspect for Cerro de Pasco's deposit. Something to consider too is that as they've been drilling, their silver grades have been going up. So it's going to be interesting to see as they move through the deposit, the different areas. It's possible that that continues and grades continue to rise, and that the silver, I'm not saying it's going to be a huge difference, but perhaps that the silver will continue to increase somewhat in terms of its importance within the deposit. And I think between that and a higher silver price, I think that silver will continue to be the dominant metal in this deposit, and I think that Cerro de Pasco will continue to for the most part follow the silver price and the silver miners for those reasons.
I think it's a great point. If they can increase the silver grade by future drilling, that gives it more prominence. But the other thing is, it's way more likely that the silver price could go up and even double from here. As crazy as that may sound, we could see 60, $70 silver. It's not outlandish, but even if silver went to the high 30s or the 40s, the silver that's in there is going to be weighted more heavily because it's going up in value compared to something like lead or zinc. So you could see that silver kicker come in, and that's true of a lot of these companies where even if it's a silver gold company, if the silver price goes up, maybe the silver becomes more germane just to that company's bottom line. So I want to
Yeah,
shift to some of those bigger producers just really briefly that
sure.
have a mix of metals, but I also want to talk about we've talked about it in the past, the M&A deals, but what these new companies may look like moving forward. You brought up Core Mining, who took over Silvercrest. They added in a great asset there with Las Chispas. See how First Majestic added in Los Gatos. They now have more of a silver dominant position again in Mexico after having going off and doing Jarrett Canyon and Nevada for a couple of years. So they're back to the one metal, one country theme. And then you also saw Endeavor Silver recently pick up a mine in Peru. They're in the process of doing it right now, the Colpa mine, and it's going to bolt on some production as well as the development of their Terranera project. So you've got these more household names, your First Majestic, your Core Mining, and your Endeavor Silver, that have all made accretive acquisitions. Do you think that this trips the trigger of analysts to cover them that maybe notice they've massed up in size or they fixed their balance sheet or they've added more ounces? Do you think this roll up strategy is going to get more eyeballs on these dual listed, big board listed companies?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's going to be enough. Certainly, like you say, they've made some big steps to grow. I honestly think that more than anything, it's going to be the silver price. A higher silver price is really going to start to attract more eyeballs and really get people interested, and it'll be the trigger. To your point a little bit earlier, this applies probably as much, well, in different ways, but it applies as much to these sort of more sizable silver producers as it does to explorers, is that a higher silver price will also bring more metal from existing resources into reserves and lower cutoffs. It'll allow you to cut off at lower grades because more of the deposits become economic. And so the more silver comes into play in these resources. And so, a little bit like we were saying earlier about Cerro de Pasco, a higher silver price, makes them more of a silver resource or more silver dominant resource. The same thing happens to all of these silver plays to some extent. So again, I think really the silver price is going to be the trigger. It'll bring a lot of eyeballs and more excitement to the space. And whether it's retail investors or analysts, I think that will be what will get them to start paying more attention and for us to start hearing about them more. If I can just mention, thought came to mind. We were talking earlier about Cerro de Pasco, which is a remediation project. You mentioned GoGold, which I also cover. Also, right now, a remediation project with some big growth on tap. And I'm actually working on another company, which I have yet to add to the portfolio. But interestingly enough, this is, I can only say limited things about it right now, but it's a North American play. It's a lot smaller scale, but it's a very, very similar business model to GoGold. They have a fully permitted mill. They are going to treat tailings stockpiles to clean that up. They're going to remediate that. They're going to produce gold, silver. Silver is going to be about 40% of the value of their output. And this is a small project that will last about 3 years. They could probably double the mine life by going underground before long. This is a mine that actually operated going back 100 years and kind of on and off since then. But very exciting because if you use, they did a PEA 2 years ago and they're revising it now. And if you use current metals prices, this is something like an IRR of 165%. It's just tremendous, the kind of cash this thing can throw off. And they go from 3 years mine life to probably 6 or 7 years mine life. And then knowing how much this mine produced over its history, we're talking about several million ounces of silver. I think it was close to 100,000 ounces of gold and plus some zinc, some lead. They have a large land package and they're going to use the cash that they produce from their tailings processing to go out and do a lot of exploration. And it's a VMS district. So I'm really excited about this. I'm about to add it to the portfolio in the paid newsletter. And it just kind of, made me think that I'm seeing gradually more and more of these types of companies that embark on tailings remediation. It becomes a cash flowing project for them and it allows them to go off and in some cases still raise funds through financings. But at least it helps to pay for a lot of exploration. And it certainly is, if you can do it and you're sufficiently well organized, it's not a distraction that takes too much of management's attention away and allow for a lot of the money to go back to exploration. It's certainly an interesting business model that I think we're going to probably start to see more and more of.
Yeah, Peter, I really like it because I like seeing that organic revenue coming in to help fund the G&A and the other exploration. And like you say, even if they have to raise, they don't have to raise as much and they don't have to raise as often because they've got a revenue center. I guess that makes me think of one other company to ask you about that's kind of taking the same model. We've also seen a big movement, more so in gold companies than in silver, to go out and buy producing assets. But we did see the largest silver optionality company, Discovery Silver, go out and buy gold mines. It went out and bought the Porcupine Mining Complex from Newmont when Newmont was divesting some of its non-core assets. So maybe
Sure.
non-core to Newmont, but very core to a company like Discovery Silver. So now they have so much silver in Mexico and
Right.
a billion silver equivalent when you count the base metals with that high grade core that they were going to work on. But everybody knows there was a slight permitting overhang in Mexico that's working its way through the politics now, and we're starting to see permits come out. But to go out and buy a gold producing complex with several gold mines, several development things, is that a model you like? Because the market share liked it. Discovery Silver, I should disclose I own it as well, but it's blasted up higher, and it kind of surprised me because I thought some silver bugs would be upset that they were getting away from silver. But of course, it's
Yeah.
hard to deny the margins and the great deal that they got on the gold side. So, what do you think of that deal?
Well, I think it was tremendous, frankly. I think that, I've spoken to them. They have insisted that this will not distract them. I mean, it is a big project to take on, but Tony, who runs Discovery, is very familiar with that project, the Porcupine project, and so I think that he's proven himself serially. In fact, historically, I think overall it's good. I had some concerns at the beginning that it would be, a distraction or it would take away from the Mexico project, but I just think that it makes sense. That obviously, the market liked it, and perhaps some silver bugs weren't thrilled about it. But frankly, like you say, it didn't hurt the share price. Maybe it attracted some gold bugs. And frankly, I think that may be what happened. That investors saw Discovery in a different light because obviously this is a transformative acquisition. They were able to go out and raise a pile of money. It didn't seem to be too much of a challenge, and the stock price absolutely shot up. So there's no question that this was a very sharp, very accretive move. No one should really, I mean, unless you're just such a diehard silver bug that you know you don't want anything but silver in a company. And even then it was, that Cordero project is a lot of silver equivalents, but still it's probably the world's largest undeveloped silver project, period. Unless you're that kind of, stubborn silver bug, you can't really complain. This has certainly helped the share price. And frankly, this thing turning around and becoming another probably bigger percentage-wise source of cash flow than some of the other projects that we've talked about, large or small, that are doing some kind of tailings remediation or pure out and outright production. This is going to probably bring a lot of cash that can help the company fund itself through all sorts of development steps to get Cordero ultimately into production. So from that angle and a few other angles, I like it. I just think that the fact that we've seen, as you said, these improvements in Mexico as well in the last several months, just has me that much more favorable on Discovery. I think that, as you say, the overhang is working its way off, and frankly, I have a hard time faulting them for for bringing on. If it's going to be anything, it's got to be gold. I'm always more favorable to a silver company if the silver content is perhaps lower than I'd like, but gold helps to, be the sort of the next most important metal. I'm most favorable to gold versus, let's say, the base metals. So that helps me, it helps, let's say, my view of Discovery in that sense as well.
Yeah, I think it was an accretive transaction for sure. They got a great deal on it, honestly, and it's going to kick off the cash flow. And this kind of gold price, I don't know how even the most ardent silver bug could fault them for doing such a good transaction. And it seems like the
Exactly.
theme of this interview has been companies using creative ways to generate revenues and get themselves into a position where they can maybe work on other development projects, but bootstrapping their way up with organic growth. I guess there's probably a few people listening that want to hear about a junior. Let's maybe throw out one, Peter, so we don't leave those folks hanging. Is there any drill program from a junior right now in the silver space that you'd like to highlight? Because we're in drill season, depending on where you're drilling and what part of the world you're drilling in. But there's a lot of companies that have raised capital. They're going to go out and drilling. Is there one you'd like to highlight that's a junior that you think has a really exciting drill program?
So I'd like to highlight actually a company that I don't think is all that known, but has done significantly well over the last several months. It's called Kingsmen Resources, and they over the last few years have consolidated a past producing area, an area that was under production by Asarco up to the early 50s. And Asarco produced there at, this is in Chihuahua, so near Parral. And so Asarco produced there, I'm going to say at grades that were anywhere from 3 to 500 grams per ton silver, which is just in that tremendous sweet spot. It's not bonanza, but it's very, very rich and across very decent widths. And so they raised a bunch of money in the last quarter or two, actually raising again right now. And have a drill program that is just about to start. It's going to be at least 3,000 meters, up to 8,000 meters. And they've done IP. They were actually in the field. Their exploration team was in the field up until a few days ago. They picked their 14 first drill targets. They're actually building the platforms right now. So this is exciting. It's about to start happening. What else can I tell you? One of their directors is a guy by the name Mark Pryor. Mark Pryor was with the former Gatos Silver, and when First Majestic acquired the Cerro Los Gatos project, Pryor actually stayed with it and is now still with First Majestic. So he's that key to Gatos. Pryor is part of this team, has seen what they have, and believes that they have some kind of an analog to Gatos, basically. So this is really, for me, very, very exciting. I'm anxious to see this drill start turning, and one never knows, right? This is still unproven, but I think that they've done so much homework with the IP, with sampling, trenching, all of that, that their odds are very, very good. And it should be a pretty exciting couple of quarters coming up.
All right. Well, I appreciate you breaking that down. And yeah, I actually was impressed by the presentation that the CEO, Scott Emerson, gave at the MIF in January, where you hosted a silver panel and had them on it. And then in the Q&A session afterwards, which I also attended, and you did a great job facilitating that, Peter, you
Thank
had
you.
Brad from GoGold in there who actually had chided Scott to get back in the industry and this project. And he also invested in this. And we've had Nick Hodge bring it up on our show before. So a lot of eyeballs on Kingsman Resources and this drill program. And we have a agreement, Scott and I, to get them on the show as soon as they start drilling and unpack some of those. So definitely a good one for people here at the KE Report to at least follow along with and see what happens out of this drill program. And Peter, it was great having you on to discuss everything from the gold silver ratio and the crazy macroeconomic whirlwind that we're facing to getting into some of the stocks here and looking at, and in particular, some of these companies' creative ways to generate revenues or to bolt on more revenues through acquisitions if they're the bigger ones and really grow in this cycle. So, a lot going on with the silver stocks, a lot going on with silver. And for those that want to get more thoughts from Peter, definitely click on the link below this. It takes you over to Silver Stock Investor, where you can follow his newsletter, take deep dives in the companies, find out about that mystery company that he flagged that he's going to be talking to his subscribers about soon, and a whole lot more. And Peter, we just appreciate you spending some time with us here at the KE Report. And as always, looking forward to our next conversation.
Thanks very much, Shad. It's always a pleasure, and I'm impressed by your memory of something that took place a couple of months ago at a conference. That's pretty good. And yeah, I think that like you said, Kingsman actually want to just sort of throw a little thing in. Kingsman actually holds a 1% royalty on part of GoGold's development property. So that's an interesting little asset there that could be quite attractive for Kingsman. But yeah, it was a fun talk once again with you today. And thanks as always for having me on. I always enjoy it.